right, so I'm just going to wish everyone a good evening on the YouTube channel. And thank you, Neil, for being here from the UK at 1 a.m. My goodness, that's a commitment. Let's see, just arrange my page correctly here on my screen. I often get lost. Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're on chapter 4 of 2 essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung. And these are 2 early essays. And the chapter we're reading tonight, chapter 4, is called The Problem of the Attitude Type. Now, I'm not sure when this article was written, but it was definitely before he published Psychological Types, which is volume 6 of the collected works, and which is the basis of the Myers-Briggs and so on. So I do want to talk about how all this connects with the Myers-Briggs. Good evening, Justin. Nice to see you. Dino, good evening.
Skip, I think this was either after Psychological Types or during the publication of Psychological Types, because there are footnotes referring to Psychological Types.
Okay, so let's see how it goes. You know, at some point I want to give everyone my quick and dirty way of thinking about type, but I don't want to steal the good doctor's thunder. So let's go ahead and read. So we're in this book, which is volume 7 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, and we're on page 41. And so I'll take the first paragraph and see what that may bring and see where it goes. So paragraph 56, the incompatibility of the 2 theories discussed in the preceding chapters requires a standpoint superordinate to both, in which they could come together in unison. We are certainly not entitled to discard one in favor of the other, however convenient this expedient might be. For if we examine the 2 theories without prejudice, we can deny that both contain significant truths, and contradictory as these are, they should not be regarded as mutually exclusive. The Freudian theory is attractively simple, so much so that it almost pains one if anybody drives a wedge of a contrary assertion. But the same is true of Adler's theory. It too is of illuminating simplicity and explains just as much as the Freudian theory. No wonder then that the adherents of both schools obstinately cling to their one-sided truths. For humanly understandable reasons, they are unwilling to give up a beautiful rounded theory in exchange for a paradox, or worse still, lose themselves in the confusion of contradictory points of view. You want to comment on that, Nick?
Yeah. So just to give a bit of context, in the previous chapter, we were talking about the will to power and Freud and Adler and their respective theories of neurosis. So we were talking on the one hand about psychoanalysis and the Eros theory and this kind of, well, more broadly, I guess, sexual theory.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, talking about Adler and the idea of the inferiority complex, so-called arrangements, and the will to power, and how both of these early psychoanalytic thinkers posited 2 different approaches to explain the same problem.
Yeah.
So where Jung says it requires a standpoint superordinate to both.
Right. So
both of these theories are adequate explanations of the situation contained in the last chapter. They contradict themselves, but not totally. So
Right. And I'm currently working on this play called The Analyst and the Rabbi, which we're going to perform next summer in Helena in our confluence. And in that, it becomes clear that Jung in the early 30s was trying to say that there's more to psychotherapy than what Freud or Adler was saying. He's not contradicting them. He's saying that yes, they're true, but there's more. And so obviously the Freudian theory is based on sexuality primarily. And the Adlerian theory is in some sense based on power, but it's also based on experience. And, the most important piece of Adlerian advice that I ever point out is that, and Jung said this many times, that you're not going to believe anything in psychology unless you've experienced it yourself. And this is an Adlerian idea. And so it comes down to like this. You have an infant, and the infant starts to crawl around on the kitchen floor, and mama tells the infant, hot, the stove is hot, right? And the infant hears the word, but has no idea what hot means. And then he goes over to the stove and tries to stand up next to it, pulling himself up on the hot stove. And as soon as he touches it, of course, he learns what hot is and screams bloody murder. So that's a psychological experience that forever after that child will know what hot means, right? And there's so many things in our lives that, we've got to have the experience in order to be able to appreciate what it means, right? And so, I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about my Marine Corps experience, but I can never share it with you, right? And so, I can say unequivocally that I would happily jump into a trench with anybody who's an active United States Marine and defend the country with no problem whatsoever, without knowing anything about their ethnic background or their experiences in life. But the fact that they're wearing a Marine Corps uniform says to me certain things about that person. And I can't explain what it is, but it's definitely there, and it's definitely an experience that you can only have by doing it. And somebody who hasn't had that experience is never going to understand it. I mean, I can take you to the evening parade at 8th and I in Washington, which is the headquarters barracks of the Marine Corps, where the commandant's home is. It's the oldest public building still standing in Washington, D.C. It was not burned down by the British, unlike the Capitol, which was. And so the Marines have two companies that live there. And in the summertime, they perform this evening parade twice a week, once at the Marine Corps Memorial in Arlington, which is the large statue of Iwo Jima, of course, and they perform this parade around the statue. And they do that every Tuesday night in the summertime, and every Friday night they perform a parade at Marine Barracks, which is quite impressive. And it includes the Marine Corps Band, which is the President's own, and it includes the Drum and Bugle Corps, and it's quite an impressive military show, but you'll never understand what it means. Okay, even if I tell you that the female piccolo player who's 23 years old, who's in the drum and bugle corps and is marching out there with the other Marines, she's as much a Marine as anybody else. In other words, there's no workarounds. You can't join the band and be a Marine. There's just no such thing. You have to actually be a Marine and then try out for the band. And so all those people I would put my life at stake with, no doubt. But I can tell you that, you can believe me when I say it, but you will not feel from a psychological perspective what it means. I can't share that with you. And so it's like the stove is hot, you have to touch the stove and then and so anyway, that's what we're talking about here, and the fact that, so in this play that we're working on, Jung is trying to, the significance of the play is that Jung had a very significant shadow himself, of course. He had the shadow with Sabine Spielrein, and then with Tony Wolff, and plus he was sort of fascinated by the Nazis at the beginning, and but he also wanted to sort of pull away from it. And so I have to play, I'm playing Jung, that's why I'm growing this mustache, but I have to play the scapegoat. Okay, in other words, I'm playing all of Jung's shadow. And so the play involves me accepting these criticisms from Rabbi Leo Beck, who is, he was the head of B'nai B'rith in Germany before the war, and he was the leading rabbi before the war, and they meet in 1946, which is, this play is about that meeting. And Jung is trying to wiggle out a responsibility in the play, and he realizes that he has to reconcile. But one of the things that he uses to try to wiggle out is to say, well, I was trying to develop a new idea of psychology that would include both Freud and Adler, and to save psychotherapy. But it's kind of lame the way he tries to do it, because he's trying to hide his shadow and his mistake, and it's a serious mistake, no doubt. And so it's a hard part. It's going to be a hard part for me to play. It's very emotional, because my good friend John Jackson is going to play Rabbi Beck, and he is going to be screaming at me on stage, and I have to be able to take it and then finally break and admit that it was a mistake, and then share some personal things with Rabbi Beck that bring him around to, then he admits some mistakes he made. And so the idea is that the two men ultimately reconcile. And so this photograph was taken 1 year after this event. And so here's Beck and Jung together at Eranos. And obviously they're in rapt conversation together at that point. So somehow they healed the rift between them. And they don't know, nobody knows exactly how they did it. because Beck was refusing to see Jung in the 1946 encounter. And what Mary Stein and Abramovich did.
Back to the book.
Pardon?
Can we get back into the book? Can we read this next chapter here?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Now, since both theories are in a large measure correct, that is to say, since they both appear to explain their material, it follows that neurosis must have two opposite aspects, one of which is grasped by the Freudian and the other by the Adlerian theory. But how comes it that each investigator sees only one side, and why does each maintain that he has the only valid view? It must come from the fact that, owing to his psychological peculiarity, each investigator most readily sees that factor in the neurosis which corresponds to his peculiarity. It cannot be assumed that the cases of neurosis seen by Adler are totally different from those seen by Freud. Both are obviously working with the same material, but because of these personal peculiarities, they each see the things from a different angle, and thus they evolve fundamentally different views and theories. Adler sees how a subject who feels suppressed and inferior tries to secure an illusory superiority by means of, quote, protests and arrangements and other appropriate devices directed equally against parents, teachers, regulations, authorities, situations, institutions, and such. Even sexuality may figure among these devices. This view lays undue emphasis upon the subject, for which the idiosyncrasy and significance of the objects entirely vanish. Objects are regarded at best as vehicles of suppressive tendencies. I shall probably not be wrong in assuming that the love relation and other desires directed upon objects exist equally in Adler as essential factors. Yet in his theory of neurosis, they do not play the principal role as assigned to them by Freud.
Okay.
So I remember last week we talked a deal about how Freud's object relations and how everything in his theory depends on either the positive or negative relation with objects outside of oneself and the transference between subject and external objects. And in Adler's theory, it's almost an entirely introverted theory. It's all about the subject. So those are the two things that he's working with here. He's building up to a process of building up to his theory of introversion and extroversion.
Right. Okay. Annabelle, do you want to read 58?
There, unmuted. Freud sees his patient in perpetual dependence on and in relation to significant objects. Father and mother play a large part here. Whatever other significant influences or conditions enter into the life of the patient go back in a direct line of causality to these prime factors. The pièce de résistance of his theory is the concept of transference. That is, the patient's relation to the doctor. Always a specifically qualified object is either desired or met with resistance. And this reaction always follows the pattern established in earliest childhood through the relation to father and mother. What comes from the subject is essentially a blind striving after pleasure, but this striving always acquires the quality from specific objects. With Freud, objects are of the greatest significance and possess almost exclusively the determining power, while the subject remains remarkably insignificant and is really nothing more than the source of desire for pleasure and a, quote, seed of anxiety, close quote. As already pointed out, Freud recognizes ego instincts, but this term alone is enough to show that his conception of the subject differs toto coeto from Adler's, where the subject figures as the determining factor.
Right. So are you with this, Beth? What do you think about this?
Well, I'm just listening right now.
Okay, well, let me give an observation here. With we're if we think about the structure of the Myers-Briggs type indicator, Freud is off in the sensing area, basically, introverted sensing area. And Adler is in the intuitive area, also probably introverted. And so
Freud was an extrovert, and that's how Jung came up with this whole theory, was saying how could his focus be on external objects? Extrovert meaning turning outside of oneself, introvert meaning turning inward.
Yeah, his focus was outside of himself. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you just said he was an introvert, but a sensate type. I mean,
well,
I mean, this is I only say that is because, as I understand it, this is how
I stand corrected in this sense. I don't know that much about Freud personally to know whether he was an introvert or an extrovert.
You're right. I don't know the guy either. I'm sorry if I.
But I don't know. But what I'm saying is that Freud is tending toward the object, which is the sensing area, something outside of yourself, whereas Adler is focusing on the subject, which is something in you. And so that's all I'm trying to get at just at this moment. Good evening, Marilyn. Do you want to read? Okay,
No,
can't hear you right now, but
you're muted, Marilyn.
Sorry, my book is slightly different,
okay.
but it's the same material. I think it's a different translation. Does it start with certainly both investigators? Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the next paragraph. Do you want to
Yes.
read that?
Okay, sure. Certainly both investigators see the subject in relation to the object, but in how different a fashion is this relation seen? By Adler, the emphasis is placed upon a subject that, in regard to every kind of object, indifferently seeks to its own security and supremacy. With Freud, on the other hand, the emphasis is placed entirely on objects, which, according to their particular character, hinder or further the desire of the subject.
Okay.
Should I read another paragraph?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Nick was cackling though, so Nick.
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't cackling. I think I was just starting to say something and stopped. I do just want to make a clarification, because what you just said was it being about sensation and that having a relationship to the object. But mind you, this chapter is titled "The Problem of the Attitude Type." Now, Jung's theory of typology is that there are two attitudes, introversion and extroversion. And he's not saying anything about functions here. He's not saying anything about sensation, feeling, thinking, or intuition.
Okay, I stand corrected. You're smarter than I am on this.
I only say that because I think it's just necessary to note that yet, even though the Myers-Briggs does posit there being all of these different types, Jung's understanding of typology and then how Myers and Briggs turn that into their system is quite different. I mean, it's based on the work of Jung, certainly. But I don't think he would have ever been the type to say, oh, well, I'm an INTP or so-and-so is an ESTJ or something like that.
Yeah,
but also, here it's talking exclusively about attitudes. And if sensation were only about relationship to the object, there would be no such thing as introverted sensation, but there is such.
Yeah.
So that's all I'll say. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, we're looking at early days in this development for all things, and Jung certainly did at some point sort of characterize his attitude type, or his typology is INT. The J and the P was added later, so
Yeah.
he never opined on that. And so
Skip, does that ever change in people? Like I was maybe 30 years ago, I was told, oh, you're an ENTJ. Could that have changed over time, or is that?
very unlikely.
Yeah, it's thought to be innate.
There's a book called People Types and Tiger Stripes, and it's like you're a certain way, and you're not going to change that way, except you can put it on as a persona. Okay, so it so happens that because I was trained in this several times in the military, I realized that whenever I was wearing my uniform, even today, whenever I put on my uniform, because I sometimes do for an honor salute or something like that, whenever I put on my uniform, my personality actually changes. Okay, I put on the persona of a very typical Marine Corps officer, which is STJ. And Colin Powell, as it happens, is my poster boy for the politician in the military who can rise to the top 3 and 4 stars. But the statistic is that 95% of all generals and admirals in the military, 95% are STJ. So they're sensing, they can get all the facts, they can think about them, and they can act. Okay. And but that doesn't mean that they can handle the politics. And so those guys, in my observation, tend to max out at 2 stars. Those guys are the guys that you say, Admiral, I want you to take your destroyer over that horizon, kill that son of a bitch and come back. And he says, aye, aye, sir, gets underway, goes over the horizon, boom, 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 comes back, says, mission accomplished, sir. Okay, that's a typical STJ, but that's not a politician military officer. So that wouldn't be Colin Powell. And it wasn't James Mattis, who we've seen in the public light, or General Flynn, who became Trump's chief of staff at one point. Those are all very NTJ people, right? And they know how to handle the politics, and they're a special breed in the military, but they tend to get promoted up to the 3 and 4 star level, right? So anyway, at least that's my observation on it, and my direct experience from that. So we happen to have seen the loss of Colin Powell today, and he's sort of the perfect political officer, right? He knew how to play the game, the STJ game, all the way up to 2 stars, but then he knew how to keep going, and he really did keep going, as we've seen. So,
Marilyn, I think the consensus to support what has just been said is that your personal type is innate, but you can also develop the other types and place those at your disposal. So the type doesn't necessarily change, but your ability to use the remaining types most certainly does.
Well, and if you know about them, you recognize what's needed in the situation.
Right. I mean, it's not going to happen by chance.
Right. And so the reason the Marine military trains officers in this is because in any mission, you want people that have strengths in all the fields, including the Fs. And so I'll just draw you the infernal Z that they use. Okay. Okay, so here's how it works. They want they take this, in any mission, they'll take the sensing people first, right? In the military. And then they want the intuitives to figure out what the mission might mean. Okay, so the way I say it is, you can show a S 1,000 trees and they won't believe there's a forest. You show an N 3 trees and he'll assume it's a forest. So you have the S who go, and that's most of the officers in the military. The S's go out and get all the details that you need for your mission, whatever that mission is. And then the intuitives crunch it internally and say, okay, this is what this means and what it means for our policy and that sort of thing. Then it comes down this line to the thinking side, and they think about, okay, how are we going to execute this thing so that it will work for us? And then finally it goes to the feeling side, where the feelers say, well, if you do that and you succeed, it's all well and good, but if you fail, you're going to have X, Y, and Z consequences that are negative. Okay, and so you need those feeling types to be able to put a check on these STJ people, because they'll just go out and kill the son of a bitch. But
another distinction that's really valuable that's helped me think about this is there are 4 functions divided into 2 categories, and thinking and feeling are the valuing functions, and sensation and intuition are the perceiving functions. I'm sorry, the other ones are the judging functions, not the valuing functions, but more or less the same meaning. One's about how you gain information from the world, and the other is about how you then make a decision based on that information. So everybody always has one of those 2 as their dominant and auxiliary function. And
there's an interesting comment here from Strayfeist on YouTube. Says, quote, Jungian psychological types, the correlative of attitude of conscious practical thinking is an unconscious intuitive feeling attitude, with feeling under a stronger inhibition than intuition. Yeah, maybe. In my opinion, this formulates either an ESTJ or an ISTP type, probably an ESTJ, in keeping with the degree of differentiation inherent in the quote. Okay, so none of this is set in stone. Nobody goes around with this stuff tattooed on their forehead. And what you want, and you want this in any business or anything you're trying to accomplish, is you want to get all the facts. You want to crunch the facts intuitively in terms of what it could mean, is it a good thing or a bad thing in part? And then you want to think it out and do your plan, that sort of thing. And then you want to consciously be aware of what the consequences are. And all these things get, very, very complex, because there are 16 personality types ultimately in the Myers-Briggs, and they're way more than that actually. So, because they're all because each of these items, S and N and T and F, for example, are actually spectra. So there are scales, and you can have any people on any stage in those scales, and you don't really know how things are for them. and so you have to be conscious of it. The idea is to be conscious of it and be able to be aware if something's going wrong because you're conscious of it.
I think what the YouTube comment is pointing out is this idea of the opposite attitude always being in the unconscious, though, because just to make the example with my personal type, I lead with introverted intuition, and then I have extroverted thinking. So extroverted intuition, the opposite of my dominant function, is in the unconscious. Introverted thinking is down below the threshold of conscious awareness, and the opposite of each conscious attitude.
Yeah, and the way I say it is, okay, I'm extremely intuitive, so I'm way out on the 99th percentile on the intuitive scale. And so I'm blind. I can't see. It's like having blinders on. For me, if you tell me something about something, man, I'll get it. I understand what you're saying almost immediately. And I just intuit what you mean. But my problem is that I don't know what other people don't get. And that's a critical issue for me. So it's a lifelong affliction because I'm blind to what the sensors think. And I don't mean CENSOR, I mean SCNSOR. I'm not readily aware of what they're missing. Right. So when I give my tree example, I see the forest immediately. Show me 3 trees, I'll assume there's a forest, and I can envision it and so on. But I don't know how many trees. If it's somebody who's a 99th percentile sensor, I don't know whether they're seeing 3 trees or 5 or 10 or 20 or what number. I have no idea how many trees they're seeing.
Yes, intuitive types, myself included, can be woefully holistic sometimes.
Yeah. Right.
We will get into this next paragraph.
Yeah. So, Marilyn, do you want to continue then with paragraph 60?
Sure. Is the translation that different?
No,
Or is
it was
it pretty
close.
close?
It was
Okay.
close.
The difference can be nothing else than a clear difference of temperament, an opposition of 2 types of human mentality, one of which finds the determining factor preeminently in the subject, the other in the object. A middle view, perhaps that of common sense, would see human action conditioned as much by the subject as by any specific object. In opposition to this view, both investigators urge that their theory intends no psychological elucidation of the normal man, but is simply a theory of neurosis. In that case, however, Freud should explain and treat some of his cases after the fashion of Adler, and Adler should condescend in certain cases to give earnest consideration to his former master's point of view. Such an adjustment, however, has occurred neither on one side nor on the other.
Yeah. So at this stage in development, Jung is way intuitive, and he's seeing that there are these levels, and he's seeing that these guys are blind to one another, like I was describing. I think that's what this is basically saying. And so
I take that from it, but also it's almost like he's dispelling very early on this notion of anyone being a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. Both of those attitudes always exist in complementarity to one another. I sadly, I have heard people say so many times, "Oh, I'm such an introvert," or "Oh, I'm such an extrovert," and that's not true for anybody.
yeah.
If you were only one or the other, you'd probably never be able to get anything done. I mean,
Yeah.
And the same with types too. But it's like he's saying here that these 2 theories really need to come together, rather, and complement one another.
Right. Yeah, and so he's seeing the duality here, and this is, a very fundamental aspect of Jungian psychology, which is that he sees the duality, and then he sees the creation of the third from the duality, which is a fundamental idea. It's an alchemical idea that came from Maria Prophetessa in the 3rd century.
Did you watch that video that I sent you?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Okay. It was last week in the advanced group when we were talking about the YouTube channel Esoterica and the video that Justin Sledge did on Maria Prophetessa.
Oh no, I didn't look at that
No.
yet. Okay,
No.
I'm sorry. I haven't had a little bit of a crisis with a friend today that I had to deal with, and
Quite all right.
so I've been a little bit distracted today. Okay, Beth, do you want to go on and read the next paragraph?
Yes. 61. The spectacle of this dilemma made me ponder the question, are there at least 2 different human types, one of them more interested in the object, the other more interested in himself? And does that explain why the one sees only the one and the other only the other, and thus each arrives at totally different conclusions? As we have said, it was hardly to be supposed that fate selected the patients so meticulously that a definite group invariably reached a definite doctor. For some time, it had struck me, in connection both with myself and with my colleagues, that there are some cases which make a distinct appeal, while others somehow refuse to, quote, click, end of quote. It is of crucial importance for the treatment whether a good relationship between doctor and patient is possible or not. If some measure of natural confidence does not develop within a short period, then the patient will do better to choose another doctor. I myself have never shrunk from recommending to a colleague a patient whose peculiarities were not in my line or were unsympathetic to me. And indeed, this is in the patient's own interests. I am positive that in such a case, I would not do good work. Everyone has his personal limitations, and the psychotherapist in particular is well advised never to disregard them. Excessive personal differences and incompatibilities cause resistances that are disproportionate and out of place, though they are not altogether unjustified. The Freud-Adler controversy is simply a paradigm and one single instance among many possible attitude types.
Okay. Good point. So he's at this stage in writing this early in his career where he is realizing these things. And he's almost, it sounds like he's suggesting that the patients kind of self-select. They automatically, maybe unconsciously, know that they should go to Adler or they should go to Freud. They may have heard something about their psychology and say, oh, that sounds like something I need to work out. And I don't know, maybe Marilyn has an observation about this because she actually is a psychotherapist. Do certain types of patients magnetize toward certain types of psychotherapists?
Well, it's an interesting question to me. When I was first starting, like a long, long time ago, I was told by my supervisor that I would do very well with children because I'm very gentle and very quiet. Mm-hmm. And he said, you would do really well with children. It turned out that I did really well with people who were mentally ill, which is not the same as children. But I don't think I would, I'm talking about myself now, I don't think I would do as well with people who are very forceful. Mm-hmm. Because my nature would be, they would be forceful and I might back off.
Yeah.
And I think a forceful person, for example, I'm just thinking personality types, a forceful person would need to be met with somebody who does not get bullied. Even
Yeah.
though I know, when I've done my own inner work, I know that I would get bullied. So I have to be very careful who I feel I can help. And there's a really interesting thing coming up now. I don't know if this is the right time to talk about it, but the field keeps changing. And there's this issue now with the difference in gender and how people see themselves and how people want to identify themselves. So I think if you're going to have a person who comes to you and they have gender issues, and maybe the gender issue is that they don't know what gender their child is, for example, that's one I've come across. You have to examine yourself to see, well, can you be objective about it? People are now, they're not assigning a gender to their child. They're calling the child they or them. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, sure, because this has been a huge controversy with Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you know about it.
No, but so for example, someone I know is a therapist, and her specialty is working with adopting parents. So if you are an adopting couple and you want to adopt a child, and say if you're a gay couple, and you want to, I saw that micro movement on your face, but that's exactly the issue. So can you be objective if you're dealing with a couple who has a certain gender, whatever it is, and they adopt a child of the same gender, can you be objective if they see that child and want to not classify the gender? And this is this is one type of an issue where people have prejudice and they're not aware of it. Yeah. So I think you have to be honest enough with yourself to say, well, I'm not educated in this. I don't know enough about it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important for the therapist to be always doing their own personal work. Yeah. When you're doing therapy, you should always be in at least a consulting group or having therapy about the work, because you can't see. It's just like you're saying you're blind. You can't see what you can't see. Right. And that's what I have to say about this. I don't know if other people have different feelings.
Well, I agree with you entirely. You have to be aware of that. Are you aware of Jordan Peterson at all?
No.
Okay, well, Jordan Peterson is
that's not our Jordan, is it?
No, not our Jordan.
Well, I look at him, he's our Jordan, yes.
Yeah, completely different Jordan. So Jordan Peterson, though, is, world famous now. He's I think he's still on leave as a professor of psychology from the University of Toronto, but he wrote a number of very powerful books. Maps of Meaning is one. And then he wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life. And that book took off, and he did a 150 city tour. But at the beginning, before that happened, he got into a controversy because the province of Ontario has a law in Ontario, and the law says, as if I understand correctly, it says that if a student comes to you and says they want to be called a certain pronoun, sexual pronoun, then you have to call them by that pronoun. And Jordan Peterson said, I won't do it. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. No way, Jose. And he finally won that controversy, but it got him millions of followers on YouTube and so on. And it's a very important civil rights thing, because we can't have the government telling us what we have to say. And here the here Jordan Peterson says, I'll call you he, she, or it, but that's it. and so he got reprimanded by the university, and so that became kind of a hullabaloo that started to get his notoriety around about 2015. I knew of him before that, thanks to my friend Eva Ritter, who lives in Santa Cruz and is a psychotherapist there, and who is also from Toronto. And so I was following him because of that, but then he came out with this 12 Rules for Life book, and he took his wife on a world tour of book announcements. And, suddenly she got deathly ill, his wife did, and then he got deathly ill. And it was only because his daughter and his son-in-law yanked him out of it that he survived at all from the crisis that he had. And ultimately, he ended up in Bosnia and got treated there. They had originally tried to get him treated in a special way in Russia, and he finally came out of the problem, and so now he's basically home recuperating and starting to interact with people once again. But he almost died because of getting overinflated, I think, possibly, but his notoriety all began with this issue of pronoun and the issue of how you treat people who want to be referred to in a different way. And he took a very rigid, basically patriarchal position, which was that I'm going to call you he or she, and that's it. And
I don't know if that's actually true. I think that the issue for him was more that he just felt, as you said, it was not the government's place to dictate what he was to call someone, and also say that it could be reinforced legally if he were not to follow that, but also that he was willing to accommodate a student's needs.
You're saying he did say he would be willing to accommodate a student's needs?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was taking the stand more against the government having.
Well, certainly he was taking the stand on the government's
more so than he was against saying
against the student,
call whatever
right.
you want to be called.
Yeah, right.
mean,
So,
and
I agree with him entirely on that stand. By the way, I mean, we can't have the government telling us what we have to say. And, that's required speech, and that's the road to authoritarianism, which was his point. And he's also an expert on authoritarianism. So anyway, but he became this very famous psychotherapist because of the political issue, and then he wrote this book and got way out ahead of himself, I think. And he'd probably admit that today. And fortunately, he seems to be coming back pretty well. Okay, and knock on wood, I pray that he does come back well, because I would like to talk with him, and many of my subscribers have suggested that I interact with him, which I've offered to do, but I don't think he's ready for the interaction that I want to have with him.
I want to just make a comment really quick that will hopefully take us back to the book. But I think that the same is true also of Jung. I think about every single person that I've encountered that has, a relatively sincere to extremely sincere interest in Jung is most definitely an introvert, and most definitely almost always an introverted intuitive type. as Jung was himself. I mean, there's also that same kind of, I guess, a bias or inclination towards this kind of psychology and not that other kind. So I think it's very much in terms of like your familiarity with the school of thought, but also perhaps in a one-to-one relationship, as with a therapist, perhaps there is kind of a seeing if this is a right fit or not, in terms of, you know, extrovert to extrovert, introvert to extrovert, so on. So hopefully that can take us back into the book here.
Right. Okay. So you're at
Okay.
62.
62. All right. I have long busied myself with this question and have finally, on the base of numerous observations and experiences, come to postulate two fundamental attitudes, namely introversion and extroversion. And I just want to make a quick comment here. I have a friend who's done a lot of work on typology, and he's pointed out to me that there's this peculiarity in the language that Jung uses here with intro and extra, where intro is apparently in the Latin language more common to enter, as in like interpersonal between two people, rather than it being intrapersonal or intrapsychic or something like that, being within oneself, which is peculiar because you would think for introversion regarding the subject and the internal world of the person in question, it would be intraversion, but instead it's worded more like interversion. So Jung is doing something funny here with the language, because he knows Latin well. I mean, he wrote extensively in Latin. Okay, so the first attitude is normally characterized by a hesitant, reflective, retiring nature that keeps itself to itself, shrinks from objects, and is always slightly on the defensive, and prefers to hide behind mistrustful scrutiny. The second is normally characterized by an outgoing, candid, and accommodating nature that adapts easily to a given situation, quickly forms attachments, and, setting aside any possible misgivings, will often venture forth with careless confidence into unknown situations. In the first case, obviously the subject, and in the second, the object, is all important.
Yeah.
Yeah, many of the paragraphs we read last week, I think that we all equally were like, yep, okay, that sounds right.
Yeah, well,
don't know if we can add anything really.
We've all been looking at this for years. But anyway, you want to add anything?
I don't know. I mean, it's put very clearly. I wish I had something to add, but apart from the intro extra bit, I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one thing I would say about my life is that there's no doubt that I'm an introvert. Okay, in my mind, I've never doubted that. But you know, when I'm called upon to be an extrovert, for example, now, then I do it. I'm able to do it. But I mean, that's a matter of experience. Okay, so you know,
well, also I think the real test is whether or not it's draining to you. I know that I can do this.
That question.
I know that I can do the same thing at work. I have to be very much the same way, constantly in communication with people.
right.
But I'm utterly exhausted at the end of it.
Yeah.
Even if it's not been a physically difficult day, I'm just wiped. After this, I'll be wiped too. But
Yeah.
I get a lot of energy from.
What were you going to say, Beth?
Well, no, I was just going to ask. I had sort of in my mind had part of that whole idea of the introvert extrovert was that the introvert goes within to like fill up, and the extrovert kind of goes without to fill up. But I was going to just ask if there was truth to that, because I mean, I too.
Well, I tell it a slightly different way.
Okay.
The way I tell it is, an introvert goes to a party and likes to stand off in the corner with one person and talk with one person or two people in their conversation. An extrovert wants to be in the middle of the room, yucking it up and telling jokes and having people laugh at him. but both types go to the party, right? And so I think we may tend to pathologize a little too much here in terms of what people are like, because I certainly, if I'm in a group, I unconsciously tend to herd some person out of the group that I want to talk to and pull them aside and talk to that person or that small group of people, as opposed to the whole party. I'm just not happy at all in the center of the yuck group, the people that are very boisterous and noisy and telling jokes and all that stuff. I never have any interest in that whatsoever. And
I think it may be an overgeneralization too, but I think it's also true in some sense that I know I suck at small talk. I'm horrible at doing that playing that game.
yes,
But if I can go deep with somebody, I can talk for hours, and
sure.
I get much from it too. It's not
Yeah,
exhausting at all.
Yeah.
So that's going back to what I was saying about nobody being solely introverted or solely extroverted. Like I lead with introverted intuition. I'm an INTJ, so it's very easy for me to sit back and run possibilities and be obsessed with the future and thinking about how things may turn out and stuff like that. But it's also very easy for me to extrovert my thoughts and talk about, theories and stuff like that. It's not as easy for me to talk about my feelings, although I certainly can and I'm not unwilling to. It's a little more exhausting because I have introverted feeling also in my type stack. And it's, for me to talk about that, it takes more from me. Usually.
Yeah, I mean, I've been put in touch with that aspect of myself, much more in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And especially as I've interacted with Tim Holmes, because Tim came to the world from the Eros side, and I came to it from the Logos side. And we met in the middle, and we have this great relationship going right now that, I just think is terrific. And it's no reflection on Tim that, he's lived the life I wish I had lived. And, I don't know that he wishes he had lived my life, but anyway. Not sure anybody would want to, but okay. So Annabelle, you want to read on here?
Sure. Tell me the number again. Our conversation.
63, I think.
Our conversation went off. Naturally, these remarks sketch the two types only in the rougher outlines. And the footnote says the complete study of the type problem is to be found in my psychological types.
Yeah.
As a matter of empirical fact, the two attitudes, to which I shall come back shortly, can seldom be observed in their pure state. They are infinitely varied and compensated, so that often the type is not at all easy to establish. The reason for variation, apart from individual fluctuations, is the predominance of one of the conscious functions, such as thinking or feeling, which then gives the basic attitude a special character. The numerous compensations of the basic type are generally due to experiences which teach a man, perhaps in a very painful way, that he cannot give free rein to his nature. In other cases, for instance, with neurotics, one frequently does not know whether one is dealing with a conscious or an unconscious attitude because, owing to the dissociation of the personality, sometimes one half of it and sometimes the other half occupies the foreground and confuses one's judgment. This is what makes it so excessively trying to live with neurotic persons.
Amen.
Sounds like Jung might have lived with a neurotic person at some point.
Well, yeah,
I mean,
his mother was seriously neurotic.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I guess several of his patients as well, and also working at the Berkeley. So
yeah, I mean, I find myself that when I'm in a new group, I normally hang back, and I don't really get accepted in the group for, let's say, 6 to 10 months if I go into a new environment. Okay, and so I come into the new environment and I sit off in the corner for 6 to 10 months and watch what's going on, and then I have a trick. The trick is to find the voids and fill them. Okay, so I find the things that are not getting done in a group. Very nice, Marilyn. Q1. I find the things that are not getting done in a group, and I do those things. And so the group very quickly becomes dependent on me because I'm doing the things that none of them want to do. And so I often was able to get the attention of the boss that way. But you have to be patient. I mean, you can't go in and throw your weight around when you go into a new organization. And so I actually, in the military, I was very happy because my Pennsylvania Dutch heritage tells me not to be prideful, and so that heritage tells me to be very humble and not blow my own horn. But in the military, you wear your resume on your chest, and so once you've been around for a while, people, you don't need to blow your own horn because people can read it on your chest, and they can read where you stand in the pecking order on your shoulders in terms of your rank. And so everybody knows where you stand vis-a-vis them, and they know what your resume is. And so that's a nice thing about a military uniform, because you don't have to introduce yourself or convince people to pay attention to you because of X, Y, or Z, because they already know that you had this experience, right? Whatever it is. And so
well, I'd like to say how I related to this
yeah, sure.
paragraph, which is that when I was young, which is to say before the age of 19, I thought I could just do anything. Some of that had to do with my family circumstances. I was given, relatively speaking, free rein. And also there was something, and it actually relates to what we were talking about, gender identity, let's call it, where I thought I could do anything a boy could do. And I don't know where I got the idea, but I just had the idea. And so I found myself at 19 working in a printing shop, offset printing shop, where there was a lot of heavy lifting to do. And I was just doing it the way that I had just done everything in my life. And I ended up being incapacitated. And within a few years, I ended up in traction. So I learned in those early years, which was between the ages of 19 and 22, and what it said in the paragraph was something about through our life experience, XYZ, right? That I learned, and I feel very fortunate at this stage of my life that I learned that lesson. I am not the androgynous, superhero, invincible human being who can just walk into any situation and do anything. I learned that the hard way, and I learned it at a very young age. And I think that it has set me in good stead. And just last night, coincidentally, right, I met a woman recently, and we decided that we had a lot to talk about. So we had dinner together. She is in a wheelchair. She has had spine operations later in her life, which ended up that she's going to be in a wheelchair most of the time for the rest of her life. I mean, she is 12 years older than me, but still, when she was my age was when she was becoming this handicapped person. I can't say that I will never be a handicapped person, but I have already been a handicapped person. And yeah, I'm doing things differently. So that was what I read in here. And so we each have our very peculiar, you might say, and particular life experiences that we will journey through, let's call it, take what we have, you know, sowing and reaping and all the rest of it. And then we get a little further down the road, and then we get a little further down the road, and then we get a little further down the road, wherever we get to.
Yeah, and
Which,
things change, absolutely.
yes, yes.
Right. So I'm handicapped right now, no doubt about it. I have a permanent handicapped hang tag, and you know, I have 3 joint replacements in my legs now, including my new hip, but unless I told you that on one of these videos, you wouldn't know it. And I'm not wheelchairing up to the camera, but you know, I do have my handy dandy cane right with me here.
Right.
And
Yeah.
You know, it does appear that I may be able to walk without a cane after another week or two, but you know, because the recovery is continuing apace, but you know, but still that hang tag says permanent on it, right?
Yeah.
Even
Right.
if I do get to the point where I can actually walk a mile again,
Mhm.
which is much to be desired.
Slowly becoming the hermit over there with your staff. There is one sentence here I'd like to read and then comment on. It's in the
Okay.
middle of paragraph 63. It says the numerous compensations of the basic type are generally due to experiences which teach a man, perhaps in a very painful way, that he cannot give free rein to his nature. And the use of the word nature is interesting here, because I don't know if we recall or not, but in the previous paragraph, and also at several places in Jung's work, particularly where he's describing individuation, he always says it's an opus contra naturam, a work opposed or contrary to nature. And obviously he's not talking about nature in the natural world. He's talking about opposed to one's own nature, to that which is innate for oneself. So in the case, to put a typological lens on this, as he's talking about here, I interpret this to mean, okay, in my personal case, as I've said, I'm an INTJ. It's like I've got introverted intuition down. My work in this lifetime is not developing that because it's already developed. It comes naturally to me. The work from my personal type is working on my introverted feeling, working on my extroverted sensation, which are lower down in the stack. And that's why he also later develops the concept of the inferior function and all of that as it regards individuation, because he's saying that you can't give free rein to that which comes naturally to you. You have to work to the things which do not come naturally to you.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in my case were that, because those words definitely were ones that were clicking in with, I mean, painful. I lived with a lot of pain between the ages of 19 and 22, and actually even after that point. But that person who was me, you could say, right, this invincible, unrestricted by, you know, some gender definitions, unrestricted by societal definitions, right? People, the Amalgamated Lithographers Union, you could not join if you were of the female gender. So, you know, I joined this IWW shop where I could be a union member, but I wasn't Amalgamated Lithographers. I mean, you know, so that, but what that a little bit boils down to is a kind of little red hen. I'm not sure what the Myers-Briggs name for the little red hen is, but that's kind of, So that's that nature, right? It's my nature. I'll ask for help. I'll have a project in the works. And when, people are like, I don't really have time right now. Maybe, fine. I'll just do it myself. And, you're going to lift that super heavy thing. I'm going to help you lift it. At least at age 19, I said that. It's still my nature to be tempted to do that and to just go for, taking action. Anyway, yeah.
Annabelle, I'm going to take a chance here and say that I
Please.
think you are probably an INFJ, and you're probably an Enneagram type 4.
Okay.
Well, it would be, obviously take that with a grain of salt unless you.
I should look back again, because I did have a whole analysis done, which was with this kind of employment agency, something or other, where, they weren't an employment, they were like a coaching agency, right? But, and then I also had an Enneagram done about 5 years after that. And both of them I have promptly forgotten, but that is also my nature to not, and that's why your guidance on the Bota deck again, and I love to remind you of that. I can take direction on something like that, and it will become part of who I am. But when I, did some sessions about Enneagram, found out what I was, I promptly just filed it away, and it's not integrated. It's not.
It's not integrated into your life.
Yeah, it's not integrated in my life. Whereas this work that we are doing and that we have been doing, the tarot previously, and also which overlaps with the work I'm doing with my Jungian therapist, I think I'm actually starting to integrate some of this, which is my own nature. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're getting a lot from the Bota process. And I also just second your point that all of this would be just theory if we didn't have some application for it. I'm very thankful that I have a group of people in North Carolina, which I've studied typology with for a long while, and we've read books, but also applied it within a group. So it actually has some meaning and application.
Yeah. And
I would like to make a comment if I may.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Oh, please, Marilyn.
Yeah. Well, what it's in this vein, when I studied Jung, I studied most of the major voices, but Jung spoke to me because of his work with the shadow.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I was really very well entrenched in what I was doing and so forth, someone brought up the concept, and it might have been Colleen, I think it might have been Colleen, but the concept of the bright shadow. And I had never heard this before, because we are so self-critical. We're taught to be self-critical. What do we do that's wrong? And then we don't look at the bright shadow. It had to be explained to me what the bright shadow was, the part of yourself you don't recognize that's good. And I said, well, I only have I always thought it was the dark. I have the dark shadow, but to fully integrate your bright shadow is so powerful.
Absolutely.
And we don't learn that. We have to have a very wise person come along and say, well, what about all the good about you? What about this? What about that? You're not even aware of it, but look what you're bringing into the world. And I don't know if Jung ever talks specifically about the bright shadow. I only heard the dark shadow. So it's like, I remember one of my professors saying, well, Marilyn, when you become a therapist, you will have to learn to embrace the Hitler in yourself.
Wow.
And I said, there's no Hitler in me. He said, if you were driven to it, there would be a Hitler. There's a Hitler in everybody.
Yeah.
But he didn't say you're going to be the Barack Obama. He said you're not to embrace that part of yourself. It was the Hitler. But what about all the good things? Like I say Barack Obama, because to me, he's pretty good. So what about that part of me, the Colin Powell in me? So we have to, we're not taught that. And it's very important. What is it? Like, I'll give you an example, because I forgot your name.
Who's
The one who's got that gorgeous smile.
Nick?
Nick, I'll tell you a little bit about your bright shadow you may not be aware of.
Yeah,
Okay,
hit
may
me.
I do that? Because it's important to understand what it means. I was flabbergasted to find out that you are going back to school, because I presumed from your participation in the group that you were already a professor.
Oh
I
my
don't know if you are aware that you present as a very brilliant person. I'm not sure if you know that.
He knows it because he first
Oh.
introduced himself as Uncle Buck to me.
Well, but you need to really be aware and own that fully, because you present as a very erudite person, not only erudite, but very. And that's part of might be your bright shadow, or maybe you're very aware of it. I don't know.
Well, firstly, I'd just like to say I deeply, deeply appreciate it. I don't know how I can appropriately requite such a compliment, but I sincerely do appreciate that. And yeah, it's definitely not easy for me, I guess, to own that part of myself. I don't know. I don't want this to turn into a therapy session.
No. But
I,
to be aware that all of us have all of these bright shadows, not only the Hitler, the dark part, but there's the bright part in all of us. But we learn in our lives to be modest. We don't want to show off. We don't want to act like a big shot. So we tend to be modest when there's all this good in us that could be brought forward so that we could appreciate ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you again. I mean, that really means a lot.
Well, and I spotted Nick for this quite a while ago, actually, and so I have a piece
over here.
I have a piece of news for Nick, which is I spoke to Eva Ritter on Saturday, Nick, and she has agreed to do a tarot Kabbalah session with us. So
Oh, great. Wonderful.
in next June. So I want you to be a part of that. It's pretty definitely. We'll work through
I will be honored to do whatever you'd like me to do for that.
because you never know when you're going to find a genius in the world, and Nick has a very bright future for him. We have a few of them that are going to come together next June, and I have these two women from Qatar and from India who are going to come, and both in their own way are quite unique individuals. They're way ahead of their
Is that your friend Kushbu?
Huh?
Is that your friend Kushbu?
Yes, Kushbu.
Oh, great.
Yeah, Kushbu is, one of 600 million Indian women, but she's like one of a kind. And she's, just to talk to her is quite a numinous experience. And we're going to see to it that she gets to Montana with us next year. It's going to be quite a numinous event, that event. So, we're all going to learn quite a lot out of it and then carry it forward. It's not going to be a one-off, and then, it's going to be one of these things where we're going to learn so much out of it that we don't know where it's going to lead, but it's going to lead somewhere, that's for sure. So anyway, that's to interrupt, but let's go on. now that Mick has his news.
Can I interrupt just briefly though, because we spoke about Raquel. When you were talking about Tarot, it occurred to me the last couple of weeks we haven't brought up. I've written a couple of emails. Has anyone heard back from her?
No, I wrote to her also.
Okay, so just checking. Thank you.
Raquel, if you're out there, we're concerned about you.
Yeah, Raquel, if you're out there,
Yeah,
please
are.
check in. I had her do a tarot reading for me one time, and it was very powerful tarot reading. So I hope she'll get back in with us at some point. Okay, so who hasn't had a chance lately? Beth, you want to take 64 and 65?
Sure, thank you. 64, the actual existence of far-reaching type differences, of which I have described 8 groups in the above-mentioned book, has enabled me to conceive the 2 controversial theories of neurosis as manifestations of a type antagonism. This discovery brought with it the need to rise above the opposition and to create a theory which should do justice not merely to one or the other side, but to both equally. For this purpose, a critique of both the aforementioned theories is essential. Both are painfully inclined to reduce high-flown ideals, heroic attitudes, nobility of feeling, deep convictions to some, do y'all pronounce that banal?
Mhm.
Okay, banal reality, if applied to such things as these. On no account should they be so applied, for both theories are properly therapeutic instruments from the armory of the doctor, whose knife must be sharp and pitiless for excising what is diseased and injurious. This was what Nietzsche wanted with his destructive criticism of ideals, which he held to be morbid overgrowths in the soul of humanity, as indeed they sometimes are. In the hand of a good doctor, of one who really knows the human soul, who, to use Nietzsche's phrase, has a, quote, finger for nuances, end of quote, both theories, when applied to the really sick part of a soul, are wholesome caustics of great help in dosages measured to the individual case, but harmful and dangerous in the hand that knows not how to measure and weigh. They are critical methods, having, like all criticism, the power to do good when there is something that must be destroyed, dissolved, or reduced, but capable only of harm when there is something to be built.
Right. I wanted to go back to Marilyn's comment about the bright shadow, because I think we've all been trained to the patriarchy, and that has been accomplished through the logos. In other words, making people believe that everything is about the rules and the way things are put together and that sort of thing, and that all that is inviolable. And we found our recently former president violating everything. We thought these things were all set in stone, but actually they were only set in the psyche. So he said, oh, well, I don't have to follow any of that. And but that's not the point. The point is that none of us actually live in the logos, okay? And the bright shadow is in the eros, and in fact our entire lives are in the eros, okay? And so my simple way of explaining this is look around the room where you currently sit, and everything that you see that there, except for maybe pets and potted plants, is not alive, okay? Logos had to be perfect to make it. So we had to have 100% perfect logos to make the iPhone, but we also had to have 100% perfect logos to make this big pen and also the headset that I'm wearing. Okay, and so there are rules and there's learnings, in physics and so on that made all of those things possible. And so everything that we use as a tool in our lives, and I have 1,000 of them within arm's reach here, that all comes from the logos, but none of it is alive. The life is in us, and the life, and we've denigrated we've denigrated feeling, but we've denigrated life and the idea of eros for 2,000 years. And what happens is, it's what happened in the Christian church, which is, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So everybody says, okay, God's a word. And for the longest time in my life, I'm saying, no, it isn't. Come on, give me a break.
But I just want to add in that sense, we've done this dance so many times, and I actually have wanted to ask you at several points, and maybe we could do this offline sometime and work it out, but it would be really interesting for you and I to have a conversation on your channel about logos and eros.
Okay.
So at least I, or perhaps your viewers, can get a clear idea of what you mean when you use logos, because I just want to add to this conversation that there are about 50 different interpretations of what logos means and what eros means. In
Well,
Greek,
surely.
it means reason, but also in the mystical interpretation of logos is the second principle of the divine one and Platonic thought, and it could be the creative principle of the one, of God. I mean, so it's confusing to use the term in the sense of written word or logic.
I'm trying to
And also, I just want to
get people to think like you're doing right now, Nick. And so yes, let's do it in a conversation online where we discuss it. Let me just finish the point so that we can go on tonight. But I would like to do that. That would be great. But my point is that my insight was that we don't live in these dead things that we have, our clothes and all those things. Those things are not alive, not physically alive. They don't have a being without us. Okay. And
not ensouled.
Pardon?
They're
Not ensouled,
not
correct.
ensouled.
And what lives in the eros side is chaos, right? And so Francoise Cain's book, Divine Chaos, is a good example of this, where she's talking about, all the juicy parts of life, including the actual experience of God, okay, the living God. All those things are on the eros side. They're not on the logos side. Okay. I mean, I actually gave a talk that's on the YouTube channel called Finding the Living God. And my point was that Nietzsche said that God is dead, and Jung came along in the next generation and said, no, he's not. There is a living God, and Jung taught where he lived and how he goes about doing the work of the Godhead. But nobody noticed that, okay? And it took me 30 years to get to that, to understand it. But it's a profound thing, and we've got to stop letting people control our lives with these rules in certain ways. We have to question them, right? Because religions per se, there's nothing wrong, because they do provide the railroad tracks by which you can get to the living God, one way to do it. And lots of people have become saints as a result of it, for example. But by the same token, they also lost the meaning. And so, yes, you and I should have a conversation like that. I would be honored to have that conversation with you.
Yeah, I would really enjoy that. And I know I would get a lot from it. I think we both would, as well as your viewers would. So
Sure.
let's talk about doing that. And
Yeah, just let me know when you'll be available. I'm pretty available most of the time.
great.
I won't be available after the 4th of November for about a week and a half, but because I'm going to be out where Marilyn is right now.
Mm,
Anyway, yes, I definitely want to do it. And so you're the guy with the schedule, so you tell me when to do it. We'll do it.
okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk soon about that.
All right. So you're going to do the next reading here.
Sure.
66.
Yeah. Okay. Both theories may therefore be allowed to pass with no ill consequences, provided that, like medical poisons, they are entrusted to the sure hand of the physician, for it requires an uncommon knowledge of the human psyche to apply these caustics with advantage. One must be capable of distinguishing the pathological and the useless from what is valuable and worth preserving, and that is one of the most difficult things. Anyone who wishes to get a vivid impression of how irresponsibly a psychologizing doctor can falsify his subject through narrow, pseudoscientific prejudice should turn to the various writings of Mobius on Nietzsche, or, better still, to the various, quote, psychiatric writings on the so-called case of Christ. He will not hesitate to cry a threefold lamentation over the patient who meets with such so-called understanding. Yeah, I mean, both in the final sentences of the previous paragraph and in this one, I mean, this, I'm thinking of one, I think it's in Ion, which is, for those who have read or have some familiarity with that book, I mean, that's one of the strangest books that Jung ever wrote. But I think in the beginning of that book, he says, I write this book with the physician's sense of responsibility, and something to that effect. And it's really strange because, I mean, at no point would you think that he's writing from the perspective of a physician in that book. I mean, it's almost like he's somewhere out above the world looking down in on a whole epic and talking about it. But both there and in these, there's this sense of discernment and responsibility for the people that he was working with, which really comes through, which I just really,
Right. And
really appreciate.
he was forced by himself to write these things. He never wrote them, just out of the clear blue sky. He wrote them when his self said, "You got to write this," And so that's why Answer to Job was written. And he had this fever, and he felt like he was forced to write the book, and he wrote it in 10 days. And when he finished the book, the fever went away. And I know that feeling because I've had that experience with a couple of the books I've written, that you're forced to do it, and you have to do it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, also there's not only the sense of responsibility and care for the people that he was working with, but also I get this feeling that there's, and this also comes from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections in the beginning, where it talks about, it's either, I think, in the foreword by Anil Ayate, or it's Jung talking about this himself, but just detailing the resistance that he had to a book being written about him, and how the book doesn't really, it consists of very little biographical information, and it's more just about dreams and stuff like that.
Well, he didn't feel that a biography that was about events was useful or interesting.
Yes, not only that, but also he was seemingly incredibly reluctant to starting an institute in his name and having people kind of become, apostles of Jungian thought and that kind of thing. And I don't know,
Right.
That's just, to me.
And he was right. He was right because those people became rigidified, right? They started to teach a doctrine at the Jung institutes, and so, to the point where, Jungian analysts are this cabal that, won't really talk about Jung. And this was the frustration I was having, because I was trying to say, why, God, if he knew all this, why aren't the Jungian analysts talking about the implications of this for current affairs, for example? And the reason is very simple. They're in a profession, and their job is to work with individuals. And when they finish the day, it's hard enough, I'm sure, to do an analysis for 7 or 8 hours a day. That must be very difficult. And who wants to go out and then work on the public affairs implications of it? If you're doing that, you're up to your neck in a bunch of patients' psychological troubles. Who wants to then go out and talk about the problems of the nation? And finally, I realized that they were never going to do it, and that's why I started to do my work, right?
Yeah, I think at bottom, what I was trying to express with that was really just that the feeling that I have is that he's expressing this almost complete and total devotion to his work and his clients and his people. It's almost like it's almost like he's saying, I don't care if you remember me. I don't need you to think that I'm a genius or anything. I want you to know that I live for the people that I hoped to affect with my work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he had those Dutch ancestors or Swiss conservative ancestors who didn't want to toot their own horn, just like I have. But my most important paragraph in all of Jungian psychology is right here in Man and His Symbols. And it's in the hardbound book, which you should have. It's and you can buy it used. It's out of print, but you can buy it used on page 101. And here's what he said. As any change must begin somewhere, it is the single individual who will experience it and carry it through. The change must indeed begin with an individual. It might be any one of us. Nobody can afford to look around and to wait for somebody else to do what he is loath to do himself. But since nobody seems to know what to do, it might be worthwhile for each of us to ask himself whether by any chance his or her unconscious may know something that will help us. Certainly the conscious mind seems unable to do anything useful in this respect. Man today is painfully aware of the fact that neither his great religions nor his various philosophies seem to provide him with those powerful animating ideas that would give him the security he needs in the face of the present condition of the world. And, I took that paragraph quite literally and said, okay, I get it. I understand that, I tried to get analysts, I tried to go to Jung societies and get them to care about this stuff, and they just don't. For them, the Jung Society is intake for their practices. And, they don't care about public affairs. They don't care that Jung's ideas could be instrumental in saving us from our stupidity as collective beings. And so they just ignore that. And they've become so exclusive that one of the fellows that's working with us on the Confluence is a psychotherapist who's been in practice for 45 years. And he's one of only 2 founders of the Young Society of Washington still living. Okay, so he was one of the founders of the Jung Society of Washington, but he is not a Jungian analyst. And even though he founded the organization, he got written out of it because he's not a Jungian analyst. And so when I described to him what we're doing in the confluence, he jumped at it because he sees that it's where things have to go. And it has to be outside of the Jungian analyst community. And, you know, this is why Jung said, you know, thank God I'm Jung and not a Jungian, because,
Mhm.
you know, his thinking was way ahead of that. And okay, these folks who built the first C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, you know, they wanted to regularize his thought and make it into a profession, and that's what they did. But he was only peripherally interested in it. He didn't think it was a thing. I mean, for him, it was a logos thing that had nothing really to do with his research. You know,
I think also, you know, we talked about this briefly last week, but I've gone back now on that Peter Kingsley, Murray Stein interview.
Yes.
Into that, and just I really got a lot more from it the second time. I listened to it over a year ago, but the thing that really came through to me was just, and we talked about this when you came back last week a little bit later, where I was asking, you know, what do you think about the Jung of this era versus the Jung as we see in the Red Book? And I'm thinking about in that interview between Stein and Kingsley, where he's talking about Jung kind of really complaining later in his life that no one understands me. I mean, he really emphasizes that not a single person understands him as he wishes people did.
Yes.
And I think that comes through at so many places in his work, because it's almost like he's saying I can't find better language for this than to say there's something way deeper than most people comprehend going on in Jung's work. That is not, it's not just therapy. It's not just something for working with patients, even though it is very much that. But there
is the mystery there. Okay, even if you get to the point of understanding what he was saying by the living God, even if you understand that in depth, I mean, in your heart, you understand what he means by that. Even if you understand it, there's still the mystery. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the point. Okay. That the mystery is bigger than us. What happens with us on Monday evenings in our interaction here, I don't know what's happening in your psyches and in the group. I know you're coming back and talking with me every week, and so there's something going on. It's a mystery to me, you know, why you're doing it. But I mean, we have 10 people still active on YouTube right now, and 6 of us here. And, you know, what's going on in our psyches that's causing us to want to do this every week? I have no idea. You know, for me, it's a mystery, but it's a powerful one. And, you know, I just had to decide at some point that I had to proceed with this without trying to turn it into a business. Okay. And so that's why I don't take, well, I do take a little bit of Patreon money from the advanced reading group, a few people, but other than that, nothing. And, you know, when we do this confluence next year, I'm taking nothing out of it. I'm putting money into it every month right now so that it can happen, so that it'll be organized and so on. But you know, I'm not going to be paid anything for that. And none of my colleagues are going to be paid anything. None of us are going to be paid anything. But the mystery is that we all want to do it. Okay, that's the mystery. And can we put a finger, or put a pin in that and say, this is why we want to do it? I can't do that. I don't know. I just know that when I started to talk about it with Tim on May the 9th, immediately he jumped at it. And in the following week, when we talked to Colleen about it, she said, I would have been very insulted if you hadn't invited me. Right? That's exactly what she said. And so there is a mystery, okay? And it's a mystery that can't be put into books. Okay, you have to experience it. And that's the point. Or it's part of the point anyway. And so all we can do is talk about it and say that there is something more. Okay, when you understand the bottom line thing that he says about religion in the new God image in his letter to David Cox, even though you understand that what he says in that paragraph, even though you do understand that, there's still a mystery. There's still a mystery. And
I think this is just an inversion of what you're saying, but it's always striking to me that there's this incredible paradox where if you reach an understanding of that mystery, that thing, it's consequently then beyond communication.
That's right.
You don't say anything about it.
Absolutely. You can't possibly convey it. And so you either and it's when he said, I have no need to believe because I know. And I had an epiphany when I heard him say that the first time, because I said, wow, I know too. And so what is it that I know? It took me 10 years after that to figure out what I knew. I said right in that moment when I watched that video, I said, wow, I know too. So now what is it that I know? And so I'll just read the paragraph so that we have context for those that may listen to this and not know what I'm talking about. So in this book, which is called The New God Image, and it's by Edinger, but it's actually, Edinger took 14 letters that Jung wrote to theologians and then put commentary on these 14 letters. And you can see how many tabs I've got going in this book. And here's what he said. Although all this sounds as if it were sort of theological speculation, it is in reality modern man's perplexity expressed in symbolic terms. It is the problem I so often had to deal with in treating the neuroses of intelligent patients. It can be expressed in a more scientific psychological language. For instance, instead of using the term God, you say unconscious. Instead of Christ, self. Instead of incarnation, integration of the unconscious. Instead of salvation or redemption, individuation. Instead of crucifixion or sacrifice on the cross, realization of the four functions or of wholeness. I think it is no disadvantage to religious tradition if we can see how far it coincides with psychological experiences. On the contrary, it seems to be a most welcome aid in understanding religious traditions. And so but the point is, as soon as he wrote that on that letter, it became logos, right? And so, people can think that he meant, okay, God is the unconscious, or your God is your God image is your God, and the collective unconscious is God. But if you accept that as what he was saying, the problem is that you get to the collective unconscious, you grok it entirely, and you really grok it, and still there's a mystery. That's the point. Okay.
One thing that I've been up against recently, and maybe this is an appropriate time to just talk about it, is I've been wondering, what do we lose from no longer talking about things in kind of a mytho-poetic sense? When we start talking about concepts just as sheer concepts or psychological constructs or something like that, when we start talking about the functions and complexes and the self and archetypes and stuff like that. And this is
personally, I think myth detracts from it, because
let me just
go ahead.
Point here, because I've been kind of placing this thought onto Jung, but I've derived this thinking from reading Plato.
Mm-hmm.
People often talk about the secret theology of Plato, or the teaching behind what he's really talking about.
Right.
He writes all of his philosophy in dialogues, which read very much like plays.
Yeah.
And yet, when you learn about Plato in the absence of reading his dialogues, people talk about it very much like he was a pure mystic, and he's writing about the one, the soul, nous, and all of these various mystical concepts. But if you go read him, accepting a few dialogues, you won't get any of that. So he uses analogy. He calls it people call it the analogical method. So when he talks about the allegory of the cave, he's clearly talking about something else. He's not talking about people really just being in a cave and there being a fire burning and all of that. Right. And I really think that gets at something, because it's almost like he really, to use your term here, he really grokked this idea that you can't talk about things of such a profound nature directly.
Yeah.
You have to talk about them through analogy.
Right. And
I agree with Jung, where it's like, maybe with neurotic intellectual people, it's good to talk about this stuff from a theoretical standpoint. But I've almost found that worked for me initially. And now I've kind of doubled around to preferring religious language, because it expresses something that's kind of poetic and kind of mythic, and it gives that sense of enchantment still to what would just be kind of
it's worked for 3,500 years since the time of Moses, right? Religious language has worked to bring the species along, and longer than that in India, where the Bhagavad Gita was written maybe 7,000 years ago.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that language, even though I know we're talking about the same thing, just hits a higher octave for me somehow. It bounces off something in me that is a little more poetic and colorful, rather than just being like.
Yeah, my reservation about mythopoesy, or whatever it is that people get out of Pacifica, is that when the average Joe out in the street hears the term myth, they think, not true, not now, not me. Okay. Because that's what myth means to us in our vernacular. It's a myth, it's not true, it's not real. And the point is that these myths are quite real, but we have to put them into a 21st century context so people can appreciate what they are. Because, I used to say, when I became a Buddhist, I became a better Presbyterian. And when I became a Jungian, I became a better Buddhist. And so the point is that, and I don't practice a specific religion now, but at the same time, I've had very deep religious experiences, some of which I talk about in the Living God, and they are Christian. they're back to things that happen at the chapel at the U.S. Naval Academy. In fact, I feel quite deprived the last 2 years because I haven't been able to go in there because they've closed it down essentially. And I have the privilege to go in because of my retirement, but not in COVID. So I'm looking forward to being able to go back in there because I've had so many religious experiences in there, which are quite mystical. And, I described a couple of them in that video, and I actually caught pictures of them, which is impossible to do. People can't capture religious experiences, but so far I've captured 3. And 1 in still pictures and 2 in video, and not since COVID though. And so the point is, when you have this religious experience, what I would call a religious experience, then okay, and you understand that it is a mystery and nobody's ever going to be able to explain it, and nobody's ever going to be able to explain it away either. That's the point.
I once heard somebody that I'm somewhat familiar with read a poem that contained several of Jung's themes in them, but talking about them as psychological constructs. And that was kind of the beginning of something. It stirred up something in me that made me realize there's almost this, it felt a little too bald for me to talk about things just to write archetypes and not talk about something that was cloaked in some kind of color or wearing some kind
Well, I mean, this is the problem with what Jordan Peterson did around Jungian thought, because when he gave all his talks around the world, he keeps name dropping Jung and keeps bringing a quote in, and to the point where a pastor friend of mine named Paul Vanderclay thinks he's a Jungian, and he's not. In fact, he says explicitly in one of his videos, when he picked up Ion, he said he thought it was the most dangerous book he ever read. And
he also said several times he's read everything that Jung has written in his collected works. I mean, I've heard you say so many times that he's kind of a name dropper, and I don't agree.
Well, he's not a trained Jungian. I'm not a trained Jungian either. Okay, in that sense, I mean the Jungian analyst community would not accept me as a Jungian, not at all. Okay, but the man that joined our group for next summer, who was one of the founders of the Jung Society of Washington, he accepts me, no question, right? But he's not a trained Jungian either, so he got bunged off by the society that he founded.
In some sense, maybe that's what you should hope for.
Well, that is what I have hoped for. But now I'm getting
not you personally. I'm just saying.
No, but now I've gotten
think a lot
drawn
of-
back in because I've developed a relationship thanks to Thomas Arst, who was also not a Jungian. He was a physicist, but
Yeah.
Thomas Arst persuaded Mary Stein to start doing these Jung's Red Book for Our Time essay books, and Thomas interacted with me, and he got Murray to pay attention to me, and it's just a hell of a shame that COVID came along, and Thomas was one of the first victims. He died on Easter Sunday last year.
I say that just because that was kind of the situation with James Hillman too.
Mm-hmm.
Was he not the head of the Jung Institute, and then was?
Yeah, it was the dean.
I think he was kind of disillusioned with his time there, and went on to start his own field. I mean, obviously inspired by Jung, but called archetypal psychology, and really responded to a lot of what he felt was wrong with
Yeah, precisely.
Jungian thought.
Yeah. So it's it's a jungle, all this stuff, all these ways of thinking about these things and so on. And it's all mixed up with religion and all the religions. And it's mixed up with politics and public affairs and all kinds of things. And so, that we really have to pay more attention. People need to pay more attention. That's why I do what I do. We need to wrap this up though, but good evening, Penelope. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sorry we haven't had much chance to interact with the YouTube group. How many of the group in the panel has the ability to watch the YouTube chat as we're talking?
I'm able. I check
I
it.
haven't tried.
Pardon?
I haven't tried.
Haven't tried
Okay.
either.
Well, I think we ought to try, because the biggest class in this group is on YouTube, and currently we have 17 people watching. We've had 15 likes today and 0 dislikes, and there's quite an active conversation going on the YouTube chat, and so I think we ought to try to follow it a little bit more.
Somebody compensate us and give us a dislike.
Yeah.
Kidding.
Well,
kidding. I am
the problem is we're the compensation for what they can't find in the rest of the world.
Maybe, perhaps. It's all order. I'm going to have to check out. So
Yeah,
I'll see you all
peace.
next week, and please have a good night and a good week.
Yep. See you all next week. I apologize for not getting any further than this. We'll probably have to take another couple of weeks to get through
I'd
this
like to make a
chapter.
comment if I can.
Surely, please, Marilyn.
When you're talking about having things be codified, it reminds me one of the first tarot classes that I came to that we were presenting in this group
Mhm.
was about the Hierophant.
Yes.
And it's like the Hierophant and the Pope, kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a fair, if those two are opposites, and I don't even remember which one the Hierophant was, because it's such a strange word, but one of them believed in the exact religion, the teachings and the law, like the Logos part, and the
Right.
other was the unspoken part. And it just feels like it's the same concept. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
I do agree with that, and it's a concept, an idea that's been around for 600 years, because the tarot cards have not changed in 600 years. They've had the Hierophant in there ever since the beginning, and the Hierophant simply means the teacher. Okay, and so it's when the Marseille deck was made in the 15th century, the teacher was the Pope. And obviously there's a shadow Pope. If you get a reversed Hierophant, it can be a negative teacher, surely. But the Hierophant just represents one of the archetypes in our lives. And so as we, talked through the major arcana, it's card number 5. It's that important. It comes right after Mother and Father. I mean, in the cards, Mother and Father represented by the Emperor and the Empress, but the point is that the first 22 cards are all hugely archetypal, and they haven't changed in 600 years because they're right and they can't be changed. And okay, some people have done some cutesy things and created a fifth suit and all kinds of jazzed up things. But in the end, all the nice new decks that you find, and I have dozens of them here, they all come back to the same ideas, which are the archetypal ideas. And so, you know, the first card in the deck is the magician, and that's you, that's each one of us. And it relates to this point that I keep bringing up of that Jung had about the eternal moment. Okay, we all stand at the eternal moment, and we have before us on the table all the assets we need to live our lives the way we want to. And yet most of us don't see that. Okay, but the magician is you, and it's you able to pick from the things that are on the table, which happen to be the four suits, and do the things you need to do in your life. And you have that opportunity in every moment. It is the eternal moment, you know. And you know, I have it right here. I don't know if I can get it out so I can read it, but I can share it, I suppose. Just a moment. Do you know what I'm talking about when I refer to that? You don't. Okay, so let me just get the eternal moment, because I have set it aside, and I'll put it on the screen for you. I'm going to explain to you what the thing that we're going to do next summer, but here's the eternal moment. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life, contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. You should take each moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future, for the future always grows out of that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. C.G. Jung. Okay, and that's essentially the beginning of the tarot deck, which is the magician. That's exactly what he is. He represents that eternal moment. And so next summer, what I was chatting with Nick about a little bit is that, you know, I have always envisioned, I've been saying for probably 25 years, that I could enter an auditorium with 1,000 people and throw the cards across the stage and do a reading directly off the floor with no specific layout, and everyone in the room would think I had read for them. Okay, that's the point. And so we're going to demonstrate that next summer. We're, you know, one of the sessions that we're going to have, because it's an experiential program that we're presenting, and I want everybody to have the experience. You know what, no matter what people think about the tarot, you know, I'm not saying that the tarot is magic, but the tarot has a mystery. It surely does. And that is that it will move the furniture around in your psyche. And so if I in my reading off the floor of the stage, if I see the Empress card and I say something about mother. Everybody's got a mother, and half the people in the room will have a problem with their mother, right, at any given time, right? Or if I say something about the teacher because I see the Hierophant, right, either negative or positive, because it could be reversed. Everybody's got a teacher, right? And everybody has a beloved teacher, and everybody also has a hated teacher. I mean, I have a beloved teacher in my life. He's now passed away, but I also have a hated teacher in my life, and absolutely detested. And he was wrong, and I was right, and he stayed teaching law to law students, and I went off and founded a public company. He was so, whatever. But anyway, the point is that if I do a reading, what's happening is that some of the things that I say will resonate with everyone. Okay, because they're all archetypal, so you can't escape it. Every word out of my mouth will have some archetypal impact on someone, and in a half-hour reading, I'll hit 4 or 5 in everybody's psyche. Okay, some hooks in your psyche that I don't know what they are, so I have no idea what my reading means to you per se, but I do know that I'll hit some things that are sensitivities for you. And then that's the mystery. Okay, that's the mystery, which is that you will think that I read for you specifically, and I didn't. I simply used the cards as a tool to touch your psyche in depth. That's basically what it does. And so I have no idea what it will do, but what it does is it gives you the opportunity to reflect on your life. And so the way I've explained it over years now is that the divination techniques of all kinds, whether they're the tarot or the I Ching or any of them, they all work in more or less the same way. And if you have a reading, you're going to say that reading was for me, and it was because it's you that has those hooks in your psyche that you heard. But so all of us have to interact with people in order to maintain mental health. And I wonder if you'll agree with me. I'll tell you this sort of level of things. So women often get together for coffee or tea together during the day. And basically what they're talking about, what bastards their husbands are, or whatever, or the problems they're having with their kids or what have you. And the men are talking about current events and who should be murdered and that sort of stuff. And they're, you see it going on in the Middle East, you see it everywhere, because every coffee shop has maybe 10 or 20 old guys sitting out in front drinking coffee together, right? And so that's sort of the first layer of mental health. And then divination techniques are when you get stuck, you can have a divination, and the divination will shake something loose in your psyche, and then you have to reflect on it. Okay, the reader can't, the reader is not a psychotherapist. The reader is just reading the divination as they see it. And but because everybody will hear the reading for themselves, everybody has a chance to reflect on whatever it is that I hit within all of them. So it's a method of stimulating self-reflection, is what I would say. Okay. Now, when we get into the mental health region, which I don't feel competent to talk about, and because I'm not a mental health professional, but first of all, there are in the world mental disease and defects, and we need psychiatrists to deal with those things and to understand them. And so people get intake into psychiatric clinics for certain behaviors. And others go to psychotherapists like you, who it's your job to understand a broad panoply of what might be going on in this person's life, and then help them reflect on it properly so that they can be re-energized in their life. I think that's would be a way of putting it. So did you hear anything in that discussion that you disagreed with, Marilyn?
Not one word. Not one word. I found I'm running a group every week now since the COVID, and I found people are coming to the group, but now they're letting me know their children are watching separately, or their spouses, they're watching. They're not part of the group, but they're learning from it. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to attend. They don't want to be part of the group, but they're fully participatory. So what I'm doing, and I think you're agreeing with this, what I'm doing now is I'm expanding the way I teach it to presume that those shadow people are there. And the other piece I'm doing, which is very important about what you said, is I'm introducing a prayer every single time. It's a prayer. I'm Jewish. It's a Jewish prayer.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that.
No, and it covers everybody. And what I have found, and why I wanted, when you were going through what you were going through, what I wanted to include you is because I found that people that are being mentioned in my group are all healing. Something, and it's bizarre, but every single person in that group who has been prayed for, whether it was cancer or a car accident or whatever it was, they've all done very, very well. And that's the mystery to me. I don't understand, because I don't personally pray, but I think the group as a group, something is happening in that.
Well, prayer works, and Edinger at one point, and I did 3 videos on this, did the Lord's Prayer and explaining how it's actually 7 petitions to your deep unconscious. And he goes through that in great detail. So if somebody on the video wants to see those, just go in on my YouTube channel, do a search on Lord's Prayer, Edinger, and you'll find those videos. But my mother, I'm not Jewish, not at all, but my mother and father both attended Friend Central in Philadelphia for high school, and that's a Quaker school. And my mother ended up having friends who were Jewish, and so she learned a Jewish grace in Hebrew, which she said before meals every day when I was growing up. And my grandfather, who late in his life, he ended up having to live with us, and he was the most bigoted man I ever met. But he had to sit next to her at the dinner table every night, and she would tell this Hebrew prayer before
Baruch
meals.
atah Adonai, right?
That's the one, yeah. That's the one. In fact, if you can give me a link to that, I'd be.
I will send it to you.
I would love that, because I've lost track of how I can look at it and remind myself what she said. But I can tell you it was a beloved part of my day every day when I was growing up in junior, senior high school. Brings tears to my eyes even now. And so it had very deep meaning to me. And so I would love it if you would send me that prayer. And so anyway, prayer is very important, and prayer is a major part also of this play that we're doing. Mary's play and Henry Abramovich's play. The play it's just remarkable, really unbelievably remarkable. And I hope I can do it right, because I have to be the scapegoat. So I have to be the guy upon which all of Jung's sins are put on him, and very thoroughly, and then I have to take them out of the village type thing. I mean, that's really what it's about. What the scapegoat happens. A scapegoat, right? The scapegoat, you put all your sins on the scapegoat, and then he gets staked out in front of the village, and the lion eats him or something. I don't know, but all the sins of the village are forgiven then. I mean, that's what it was thousands of years ago. And but that's basically the role I have to take. I have to accept all the shadow of Jung. And it's going to be quite a challenge, because my friend John Jackson, who's playing Rabbi Beck, has to be quite severe to me on stage. And, that's going to be very hard to take. Right. I know that. I mean, I already know that the people who performed the play before, there's a video of it on YouTube, which you can find under the Asheville Jung Center. It's called The Rabbi and the Analyst, or no, The Analyst and the Rabbi. So you can find it on YouTube now, and watch it for free. But we're going to be performing it live, and I hope others will watch it before then, because it's a very powerful play. But the people that acted in it in 2016, that is the video, said that when they got to actually performing it on the play, it was quite emotional, taxing on them to get up on stage and go through the motions. So we'll probably be practicing it on that porch you're sitting on, according to your virtual background, next month. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I'm coming to California, is to do that. So thank you, Justin, and Savage Sapien. And Savage Sapien says, could someone link that prayer in the chat? I will try to remember to do that. If you in the responses under this video, if you would remind me to do it, I'll get a notice to do it. And if Marilyn sends me the prayer, I'll put it in share it with everyone. Because the thing about Hebrew and Jewish prayers is that, as Jung understood and says explicitly in this play, that his father could read Hebrew and his grandfather could speak it. And he says, Rabbi Beck explains what his name means. And Jung makes the statement that your name touches very deep layers of the psyche. And he's referring basically to deep layers that were formed 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And when, at the time that the Hebrew language was developed, and so it's very meaningful if you know that language. Now, I happen to have studied not Hebrew, but Chinese and Japanese. And so I'm very familiar with how pictographs and that kind of writing can have a very deep effect on you, because it's not phonetic, you're actually seeing pictures, and that's what's also in the Hebrew language. I believe, although I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but I've also seen it in Arabic as well.
There's. Do I have a minute to comment on this?
Sure, please.
Okay. I said before about Barack Obama. Now, Barack means blessing. Mm-hmm. And the first word of the prayer is Baruch, which is the same as Barak. I don't know if people know that.
Probably not.
But look, Barak and Baruch, it's the same, it comes from the same root.
I have no doubt.
And the first word of the Torah is Bereshit, which means in the beginning. And so those words are connected, Baruch, Barak, and Bereshit. It's very interesting to me. The words are it's all about the meaning of the word. So if someone is reading the Torah and the Hebrew is flowing and they say the word incorrectly, or they mispronounce it or use the wrong word, they are stopped in the middle of what they're saying because they're saying the wrong thing. And they should never say it. They're saying the word of God or the word of Moses. It should never be incorrect.
Yes.
So it's very important, because all around the world, the Jewish people are saying these prayers. It has to be identical. If there is one error, if it's a Torah and it's handwritten, if there was one error, it couldn't be used. Mm-hmm. So, but I think to me, it's very amazing that Barack Obama comes from the word, or is the same as the word blessing, Baruch and Barak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are many, not only in the Jewish community, but in the Muslim community, there are many people.
Yes, it's. The Jews and Muslims are really cousins in my heart.
Yeah, well, and
they're cousins, and that's why they fight so much, like relatives.
Right. And, there was no such thing as Islam before 640 AD. So they all consider themselves as part of the Abrahamic tradition. And, there are many surprising facts, like, what is the Kaaba that the Muslims pray to? Okay, and I asked that question my very first trip to Saudi Arabia. I said, please, Suleiman, tell me, what is it that's in this Kaaba that all the Muslims are praying to? And do you know what it is? It's a well. And it's a well that was given to Hagar after she was banished from Abraham. And Hagar was the mother of Ishmael. And so after she was banished by Abraham, well, by Sarah, I guess, actually, Sarah pushed her out, and Hagar trekked across the desert, and the Hajj actually is a reenactment of Hagar's journey. That's what it is. And what's in the Kaaba is a well that was given to Hagar by God, and that saved her. And when people go on Hajj, and I don't know if you're aware that I've been to Saudi Arabia 23 times since 2002 on business, okay, in the healthcare business. And when people are on Hajj, they all take a 5-gallon jerry can of water from that well back with them. And so it's very common to see people arriving in India, let's say, and out of the hold of the airplane will be like 30 5-gallon jerry cans with water from this well to this day. And they're taking that divine water back to all their Muslim relatives who weren't able to make the Hajj that year. It's very moving.
I didn't know that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but that's what the Hajj is.
Is that where Hagar actually went then? Is it geographic
Yes.
location? So it is geographically.
Yeah, so when she was chased out by Sarah, she, Ishmael is actually Abraham's first son, right? Not Isaac. Ishmael is because Sarah couldn't have children, and then God gave Sarah Isaac, but that was the second son. That wasn't the first son. And so the Hajj is a reenactment of of Hagar's trip to Mecca, where she found this well that was given to her by God, and there's always been water in this well ever since. And so just imagine this is a place in the desert where there's a well that has never failed since the time of Abraham. And it gives up this water to all these people who carry it back with them. And you can see why it's truly sacred to them. And you know what Eid is? Eid al-Adha.
Yeah.
It so happens that I have a Palestinian protege who was staying with us one summer, and she came out of this room where I'm sitting right now one day and said, "It's Eid," very excited. And I said, "Well, okay, Lana, please tell me what Eid is. Explain it to me." And she said, it's the day that Isaac was spared. And so it's the celebration of Abraham not murdering his son. And my friend Rabbi Steve Fuchs, who used to be the president of the World Union of Progressive Jews, explains in his book that it was the end of human sacrifice in the West. That marked the end because Abraham had this vision that he could sacrifice a goat instead of his own son. And And, it was literally in the human species, it was giving up human sacrifice. And, human sacrifice was everywhere in the world. And so, Jews stopped doing it at the time of Abraham. That's why he's the father of the three Abrahamic religions. And, that's the whole story of, now there is another thing in Mecca, and that is that there was a meteor or something that also landed in this roughly the same spot in Mecca. So, but that's not the important thing. I mean, when I asked Suleiman, I said, "So Suleiman, why do you pray 5 times a day to Mecca?" And he said, "Because it's a well." And then I came to learn over years, 11 years of traveling back and forth to Saudi Arabia, that it's the well that God gave Hagar after she was chased out by Sarah and Abraham, or by Sarah, actually, I guess. Well, it was a woman thing. But
Sarah is such a common name.
I have a sister, Sarah.
I have a sister, Sarah, too. And I've talked to 2 Sarahs in the last day who are other Sarahs. I don't know. It's sounding like it's a name with a lot of contrasting history and association.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I made the mistake of naming one of my daughters Cassandra. And Cassandra is the woman in the Trojan War who could predict the future, but no one would believe her. And I don't know if my daughter has that ability, but it's me that has that curse. I have that curse that I can predict the future, but nobody believes me. And it's a true curse. So anyway, yeah. So anyway, yeah, just I did say the Kaaba, and what's holy is the well, okay, and the meteorite too, because there's something around the meteorite too. But it's like the Lot having his family turned to salt, pillars of salt. That was meteorite too. It's been demonstrated now scientifically that's what destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which was a meteorite that exploded over the desert, over those cities, over those ancient cities. So it was, to ancients, that must have seemed like something from a divine being.
Well, it came from the heavens.
It surely did. And who can say? It's a mystery, but so Lot's family did get turned to pillars of salt on that occasion. So Marilyn, is there anything else you want to talk about? Or anyway, if you would send me that prayer, I would be very grateful. Thank you. You're muted right now, so I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I will send you that, and I'm going to send you the prayer for healing.
Oh, thank you.
Very, very powerful. And I want to just say one thing. The woman who wrote it, there's a woman who's she's not living anymore, Debbie Friedman, but she took a lot of Jewish prayers and she wrote them as if they're camp music when you go to camp and you learn these songs, because the melodies are so beautiful and so easy to sing that you you learn them very quickly. So
Sure.
the prayer is partly in Hebrew and partly in English.
Wonderful. Thank
And the
you.
melody is just beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to seeing
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you know I'm going to be out there. Do you have contact with Colleen Guibert?
I don't have it right now, but I could make contact with her, sure.
Well, because she's gathering a bunch of her students together for a brief outside sunset party gathering together on the 6th of November. Okay. And
I will try to be there.
yeah,
That would be wonderful.
it would be I think it's going to be 5 to 6:30, and it's a bit of a potluck, I think, but if you have contact with her, you can
I
tell
will
her.
definitely try to be there.
Yeah, tell her I told you about it. And,
Okay.
yeah. And you're welcome to join us that evening. We're gonna have an interesting evening, I think. So
That's November 4th.
it'll be November 6th,
Oh,
Saturday, November 6th.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So anyway, so peace. Take care, ladies. I'm gonna wrap it up for tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care now.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Annabelle, also for being here.
Yes. Oh, no.
Yes, thank
It's been
you,
a wonderful
Annabelle.
evening. Yeah. Thank you so much. All right.
Peace.